In a mahogany-paneled law office, 69-year-old Wendy Brown Smith sat surrounded by wealthy family members who treated her with barely concealed condescension. When the lawyer announced her inheritance, a mere $5 and a tarnished brass key, their cruel laughter filled the room. But the routine reading took a shocking turn when Eleanor Whitman continued reading. The key unlocked the deed to Cordelia's private island, complete with a multi-million-dollar sustainable resort generating millions annually. The family's simple librarian had just inherited an environmental paradise they'd coveted for decades, proving hidden worth often lies beneath dismissed exteriors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Wendy Brown Smith adjusted her worn cardigan and glanced around the mahogany-paneled conference room, feeling as invisible as she always did at family gatherings. The leather chairs were occupied by her successful relatives, their expensive suits and confident postures forming a stark contrast to her modest appearance. At 69, she had learned to make herself small in their presence, a skill honed over decades of being the family disappointment. Richard, her eldest son, checked his Rolex with obvious impatience. His tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than Wendy's monthly pension. "Can we get this moving, Eleanor? Some of us have actual businesses to run." His wife, Patricia, nodded in agreement, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her designer handbag. Eleanor Whitman, Cordelia's wrong-time attorney, remained unperturbed behind the imposing desk. The silver-haired lawyer had an air of quiet authority that reminded Wendy of her late sister, the same sharp intelligence behind kind eyes. "I understand everyone's eager to conclude this matter. Cordelia was very specific about how this reading should proceed." Frank, Wendy's younger brother, leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. Poor Cordelia, all that money and no sense of family responsibility, living alone on God knows what kind of commune up in Maine. "It wasn't a commune, Uncle Frank," Grace said quietly from the corner. At 17, Wendy's granddaughter possessed an enviable blend of her grandmother's thoughtfulness and her generation's fearless honesty. Aunt Cordelia was an environmental engineer. Patricia's laugh was crystalline and cutting. "Oh yes, the tree hugger phase. Such a waste of her inheritance from your grandfather." Wendy felt the familiar sting of being overlooked. Her daughter Sarah caught her eye and offered a sympathetic smile. But even Sarah's expression carried that worried look, the one that said she feared her mother was too fragile for life's complexities. "If we could begin," Eleanor said, opening a thick folder with practiced precision. "The last will and testament of Cordelia Margaret Brown, dated March 15th of this year." The room fell silent except for the subtle sounds of expensive fabric rustling as everyone leaned forward. Wendy could practically see dollar signs dancing in Richard's eyes. His real estate development company had been struggling. She'd overheard enough hushed phone conversations to piece that together. Eleanor's voice carried clearly through the room as she read the formal language of trusts and bequests. To the local environmental foundation, $50,000. To various charities, smaller amounts that still made Richard's jaw tighten. To Frank, their grandfather's vintage watch and his old business papers. "And to my nephew, Richard Smith, I leave my collection of first edition environmental science textbooks with the hope that education might broaden perspective." Richard's face flushed. "Books? That's it?" "And to my dear sister Wendy, I leave the sum of $5. And this." She reached into a small velvet pouch and withdrew a tarnished brass key, placing it carefully on the table. The silence stretched for a heartbeat before Richard erupted into laughter. $5? 5 actual dollars? His laughter was echoed by Patricia's delighted giggling and Frank's snorting chuckle. "Well," Patricia said, not bothering to lower her voice, "at least Cordelia had a sense of humor about where Wendy stands in the family hierarchy." Wendy felt her cheeks burn, but before she could speak, Eleanor raised her hand. "I'm not finished." The lawyer's tone carried a warning that made even Richard fall silent. Eleanor lifted the brass key, holding it up to catch the afternoon light streaming through the office windows. This key unlocks a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Portland, Maine. Inside that box, Wendy Brown Smith will find the deed to Cordelia's private island property, known as Sanctuary Island, located 12 miles off the coast of Maine. The laughter died as if someone had flipped a switch. Additionally, Eleanor continued with the slightest hint of satisfaction, Miss Smith will find documentation showing ownership of Sanctuary Resort, a fully operational, sustainable tourism facility that has generated an average annual profit of $2.3 million over the past 5 years. Frank's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Patricia's perfect composure cracked, revealing naked shock beneath her carefully applied makeup. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. But it was Richard's reaction that struck Wendy most forcefully. Her son's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and something that looked almost like desperation. "That's impossible," he sputtered. "There has to be some mistake. Mother doesn't know anything about running a business. She's just a—" "What, Richard?" Grace's voice cut through his sputtering like a blade. "Just what?" Wendy found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Eleanor, I don't understand. Cordelia and I barely spoke for the last 20 years. Why would she—" "Your sister left detailed instructions," Eleanor said gently. "She was very clear about her reasons. There are additional documents I'm to give you privately." "This is ridiculous," Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "My mother is 70 years old. She's never managed anything more complex than a library card catalog. Cordelia was clearly not in her right mind when she made this will." "I'm 69, Wendy said, quietly, but no one seemed to hear her. Frank nodded vigorously. "Richard's right. This is elder abuse, plain and simple. Someone obviously manipulated Cordelia, took advantage of her isolation." "The will was properly witnessed and notarized," Eleanor said calmly. "Miss Brown was examined by 2 physicians and a psychiatrist before signing. She was declared completely competent." Patricia leaned forward, her voice honeyed with false concern. "But surely you can see this puts poor Wendy in an impossible position. She has no experience with property management, environmental regulations, business operations. The stress alone could be dangerous at her age." "I'm sitting right here," Wendy said, her voice stronger now. "You can speak to me directly." For the first time since the reading began, the room's attention focused entirely on her. The weight of their collective gaze, some shocked, some calculating, all surprised, should have made her shrink further into her chair. Instead, something stirred in her chest, something that felt remarkably like anger. "Eleanor," Richard's voice took on the commanding tone he used in business negotiations, "I'll need to review all documentation related to this alleged property. As her son, I have a responsibility to protect my mother's interests." "Actually," Eleanor said, "your mother's interests are protected by her being the sole inheritor, and by these." She withdrew a sealed envelope and a small package, a personal letter from Cordelia, and boat tickets to Portland, Maine. The next ferry to Sanctuary Island leaves Thursday morning. Wendy reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. Her name was written across the front in Cordelia's familiar handwriting, the same careful script that had adorned birthday cards when they were children. "Thursday?" Sarah spoke for the first time since the revelation. "Mom, that's only 3 days away. Maybe we should contest this entire farce," Richard interrupted. "No court would uphold such an obviously compromised will." Grace stood up abruptly, her teenage frame radiating indignation. "Maybe you should listen to Grandma for once instead of deciding what's best for her." "Grace, honey," Patricia's voice dripped condescension. "Adults are talking." "Then start acting like adults," Grace shot back. Eleanor cleared her throat. "The will is ironclad, I assure you. But Miss Smith is under no obligation to accept the inheritance. She has 30 days to make her decision." Wendy clutched the envelope and tickets to her chest, feeling the solid weight of possibility. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, every eye in the room was on her not with pity or dismissal, but with something approaching respect, or at least uncertainty. She started hunched over and ended up standing up straighter. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course you will, Mom," Sarah said gently. "This is overwhelming. We'll help you figure out what's best." But as Wendy looked around the room at her family's faces, Richard's barely contained fury, Frank's patronizing concern, Patricia's calculating assessment, she realized that for the first time in her life, what was best for her might not be what they thought at all. The brass key felt warm in her palm, and she found herself wondering what other surprises her sister had left behind. Wendy's modest apartment felt smaller than usual when she returned from the lawyer's office. The familiar surroundings, her threadbare but comfortable reading chair, the overflowing bookshelves, the framed photos of her late husband, Tom, seemed to pulse with new significance. Everything looked the same, yet she felt fundamentally altered by the weight of the brass key in her purse.
They'll say you're too old, too naive, too overwhelmed. Don't listen. You've been underestimated your whole life, and it's made you stronger than they know. Go to the island. See what I built. Then decide if you have the courage to claim what's yours. All my love, Cordelia. P.S. Marcus Rivera runs the resort. He's protective and probably suspicious of family members, but he's good people. Lily Santos handles the environmental programs. Trust them both. Wendy wiped tears from her cheeks, feeling a complex mixture of grief and gratitude. Before she could fully process the letter's implications, her doorbell rang. Richard stood on her doorstep, flanked by Frank and Patricia like corporate enforcers. They pushed past her polite invitation to enter, filling her small living room with expensive cologne and barely contained agitation. "Mom, we need to talk," Richard said without preamble, his businessman persona fully engaged. "This whole situation is obviously a setup. Someone took advantage of Cordelia's isolation." Frank settled his bulk into her reading chair without invitation. "Wendy, honey, you have to see this isn't normal. People don't leave millions to someone who's never managed anything bigger than a library budget." "The library had an annual budget of over $200,000, Wendy said quietly. "I helped plan the renovations and manage the digitization project." Patricia waved dismissively from her position by the window, as if Wendy's accomplishments were gnats to be swatted away. "That's exactly what I mean. This is so far beyond your experience. Environmental regulations, tourism licenses, staff management. It would be overwhelming for someone half your age." "I'm not incompetent," Wendy said, her voice gaining strength. "Of course you're not, Mom." Richard's tone carried the patronizing patience reserved for difficult children. "But this is predatory. Cordelia isolated you, made you feel special, then dumped this burden on you knowing you'd be in over your head." Frank leaned forward with practiced concern. "Think about the stress, Wendy. At your age, this kind of pressure could affect your health. Tom wouldn't want you risking yourself for some fantasy." The mention of her late husband struck deep. Wendy felt the familiar doubt creeping in, the voice that had whispered, "You're not enough," through decades of family gatherings where her opinions were dismissed and her accomplishments minimized. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Patricia's smile was sharp as a scalpel. "We want to help you, obviously. Richard could take over the business side. He understands real estate and development. Frank could handle the legal complications. You'd still benefit financially, but without the impossible responsibility." "And if I said no?" The silence stretched uncomfortably before Richard answered. "Mom, we're trying to protect you. If you insist on going through with this charade, we'd have to consider other options. Competency evaluations, perhaps? No court would expect someone your age to handle something this complex alone." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Wendy felt her granddaughter's eyes on her from across the room. Grace had arrived during the conversation and stood frozen in the doorway, her backpack still slung over her shoulder. "Wow," Grace said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Are you seriously threatening to have Grandma declared incompetent because she inherited something you wanted?" "Grace, this is an adult conversation," Patricia snapped. "Then start acting like adults instead of vultures." Grace shot back, moving to stand behind Wendy's chair. "Grandma is brilliant. She reads more in a month than all of you combined. She organized the entire Historical Society fundraiser last year and raised $30,000. Richard's face reddened. This isn't about intelligence, Grace. It's about practical experience and age-related limitations. What limitations? Grace pulled out her phone. She just bench-pressed more books than you've read in your lifetime, and she hikes 5 miles every Saturday. What exactly can't she handle? Wendy felt a text buzz on her own phone. A quick glance showed a message from Grace. Don't let them bully you. You've got this. I believe in you. The simple words strengthened her more than any of the adults' arguments had weakened her. Sarah appeared in the doorway, still in her nursing scrubs, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. What's going on here? We're trying to save your mother from making a terrible mistake, Frank explained. Sarah's eyes moved between the family members, taking in the scene. Mom, what do you want to do? It was the first time anyone had asked her opinion since leaving the lawyer's office. Wendy looked at her daughter, really looked at her. Sarah was tired, worried, caught between loyalty and practicality, but she was asking, not deciding. I want to see the island, Wendy said simply. I want to understand what Cordelia built before I make any decisions. Richard stood abruptly. That's exactly what I was afraid of. You're already being influenced by Cordelia's manipulation. Maybe, Wendy said, surprising herself with her calm tone. Or maybe I'm finally making my own choice instead of letting everyone else decide what's best for me. She stood as well, the brass keys solid in her palm. I'm going to Maine on Thursday. When I come back, I'll have a better understanding of what I'm dealing with. Mom, I'm trying to... Richard's voice carried a warning. Don't force us to take legal action to protect you. Grace stepped forward, her phone obviously recording. Please do. I'd love to see you explain to a judge why a woman who's been managing her own life for 69 years suddenly needs a legal guardian the moment she inherits something valuable. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of Wendy's old refrigerator. She looked at each family member in turn, seeing them clearly, perhaps, for the first time. The fear behind Richard's bluster, the genuine concern mixed with Frank's paternalistic assumptions, Patricia's cold calculation, Sarah's torn loyalty, and Grace, fierce, brilliant Grace, standing ready to fight for her grandmother's right to make her own choices. I'll call you when I get back from Maine, Wendy said finally, but I'm going, and I'm going alone. The airport terminal buzzed with controlled chaos that Wendy hadn't experienced in over a decade. Her last flight had been to Tom's sister's funeral in Ohio, a grim affair that had left her with no desire to repeat the experience. Now, clutching her boarding pass and the small overnight bag she'd packed with trembling hands, she felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. The young gate agent smiled with practiced patience when Wendy approached her for the third time to confirm her departure gate. Gate B7, ma'am. Boarding starts in 20 minutes. Thank you. I'm sorry, It's been a while since I've flown. No problem at all. First time to Maine? Yes. I'm visiting an island. The words felt foreign on her tongue, as if she were claiming to visit Mars. The flight to Portland was mercifully brief, though Wendy's knuckles remained white against the armrests during takeoff. As the small plane banked over the coastline, she pressed her face to the window and gasped. The Maine coast stretched below like a watercolor painting. Rocky outcroppings, dense forest, and countless islands scattered across water that shifted from deep blue to emerald green. Somewhere down there was Cordelia's island. Her island. Portland's small airport felt manageable after the overwhelming bustle of her departure city. Wendy found the taxi stand easily enough, and the driver, a weathered man named Joe, who spoke with the unhurried cadence of coastal Maine, proved to be a fountain of local knowledge. Sanctuary Island, eh? He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. You know Cordelia Brown? Knew. Am her sister. Joe's expression softened. Sorry for your loss. Hell of a woman, that one. Built something special out there. You've been to the island? Many times. I run supplies out there when the regular ferry can't make it. Storm damage, emergency deliveries, that sort of thing. He navigated the winding coastal road with easy confidence. Your sister was particular about who she worked with. Had to prove you shared her values before she'd do business. What kind of values? Joe chuckled. Respect for the water, mostly. She wouldn't hire anyone who dumped oil or trash overboard, made sure all her contractors used biodegradable cleaning products, even had me switch to a hybrid engine, paid for the conversion herself. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At the marina, Joe helped her find Captain Sarah Chen, no relation to her daughter despite the shared name. The captain was a compact woman in her 50s with sun-weathered hands and an economy of movement that spoke of decades on the water. "Mrs. Smith? I've been expecting you. Cordelia spoke of you often." Wendy felt a flutter of surprise. "She did? Called you her secret weapon." Captain Chen's smile was enigmatic as she gestured toward a sleek catamaran that looked more like a yacht than a working vessel. "All aboard the Osprey. We'll have you there in 40 minutes. As they pulled away from the dock, Wendy felt the last of her family's doubts slip away with the shoreline. The ocean air filled her lungs, carrying scents of salt and seaweed that awakened memories of childhood summers when she and Cordelia had spent hours exploring tide pools and collecting shells. "First time seeing the island?" Captain Chen called over the engine noise. "Yes. I'm not sure what to expect. Your sister built something remarkable. Most developers would have cleared the trees and crammed in as many units as possible. Cordelia worked with the landscape instead of against it." 20 minutes out, Captain Chen pointed toward a green smudge on the horizon. "There she is." As they drew closer, Wendy could make out details that made her breath catch. Solar panels glinted from rooftops that seemed to grow organically from the forest.
Said it was the best field study location he'd ever encountered. A testimonial from a family caught Wendy's attention. Our teenagers thought they'd be bored without Wi-Fi and video games. Instead, they spent every day helping with the Osprey monitoring program and learned more about environmental science than in a year of school. They're already begging to come back. Another read, "I'm a CEO who hasn't taken a real vacation in 15 years. Sanctuary Island taught me that true luxury isn't about being served. It's about being connected to something larger than yourself." "Your sister understood something most people miss," Captain Chen said quietly. "People are hungry for meaning, for the chance to make a positive impact. She gave them that while showing them the beauty of living sustainably." Wendy wandered through the lodge in a daze, taking in details that revealed Cordelia's thoughtful planning. Rainwater collection systems, composting toilets that somehow managed to be elegant, a garden kitchen that supplied fresh herbs and vegetables, solar hot water systems, everything integrated seamlessly into the island's natural beauty. She was examining a display about the island's carbon-neutral status when a male voice behind her said, "I don't suppose you're the mysterious sister Eleanor mentioned." Wendy turned to find a man in his early 40s watching her with undisguised wariness. Tall and lean, with graying temples and intelligent dark eyes, he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to responsibility. His work clothes, khakis and a polo shirt with the Sanctuary Island logo, were practical but well-maintained. "I'm Wendy Smith. You must be Marcus Rivera." His expression remained carefully neutral. "I am. I have to ask, what exactly are your intentions for this place?" The blunt question caught her off guard, but something in his protective stance reminded her of Cordelia's letter. "He's good people," her sister had written, "but he's protective." "I honestly don't know yet. I'm trying to understand what my sister built here." "And then?" Wendy looked around the lodge, taking in the evidence of Cordelia's vision made real. For the first time since the will reading, she felt a flicker of something that might have been belonging. "Then I suppose I'll decide if I'm brave enough to continue her work." Marcus studied Wendy's face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people's true intentions. The silence stretched between them until a warm voice interrupted from the lodge's entrance. "Marcus, stop interrogating the poor woman before she's even had a chance to see what we do here." The newcomer was a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that held both intelligence and kindness.
She wore hiking boots and cargo pants stained with what appeared to be soil, and her smile immediately put Wendy at ease. "You must be Wendy. I'm Lily Santos." She extended a dirt-smudged hand without self-consciousness. "I run the environmental programs here. Cordelia spoke of you often." "She did?" Wendy shook the offered hand, noting Lily's firm grip and the calluses that spoke of hands-on work. "Frequently. She said you were the only family member who truly understood why the tide pools mattered." Lily's eyes twinkled. "She also said you had a mind like a steel trap for environmental data, which frankly intimidated some of the graduate students who visited." Marcus's expression shifted slightly, his wariness tempered by curiosity. "You have a background in environmental science?" "Not formally," Wendy said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I've just read extensively. When you spend 40 years as a librarian, you develop broad interests." "What kind of reading?" Lily asked, and something in her tone suggested this wasn't idle curiosity. "Marine biology, mostly, climate science, sustainable energy systems. I helped the library develop our environmental collection and organize several lecture series on conservation topics." She paused, then added quietly, "My family always said it was just a hobby." Lily exchanged a meaningful look with Marcus. "Why don't I show you around? Marcus can continue glowering at paperwork, and we can see if Cordelia was right about you having an eye for this kind of work." They began with the solar farm, a clearing where panels were arranged to maximize efficiency while minimizing visual impact. Lily explained the system's capacity and battery storage with fluency of someone who understood every component. The initial installation could have powered twice this capacity, but Cordelia insisted on leaving space for the ecosystem to breathe. "See how we've allowed native grasses to grow between the arrays? It provides habitat for ground-nesting birds and prevents erosion." Wendy knelt to examine the vegetation, recognizing several species from her reading. "Beach pea and seaside goldenrod. They're nitrogen fixers, aren't they? They improve soil quality while requiring minimal water." Lily's eyebrows rose. "Exactly. Most visitors don't recognize the intentional landscaping choices." Their next stop was the waste management system, where Lily demonstrated the composting toilets in gray water filtration with obvious pride. "We process everything on site. No impact on the surrounding marine environment." "How do you handle the methane capture from the composting?" Wendy asked, studying the system's design. "We collect it and use it to supplement the kitchen's gas needs." But her voice held new interest. "You know about methane management?" "I read a fascinating paper about integrated waste systems and sustainable communities last year. The author argued that most eco-resorts miss opportunities for closed-loop efficiency." Marcus, who had been trailing behind them with obvious skepticism, stepped closer. "What did the paper conclude?" "That the key is thinking in terms of cascading energy use rather than waste disposal. Every output should become an input for another system." Wendy gestured toward the composting facility. "Like using methane for cooking and the finished compost for soil amendment." "Which we do," Marcus said, and for the first time his tone held something approaching approval. The organic garden proved to be Wendy's undoing. Rows of vegetables grew in carefully planned succession, with companion planting that spoke of sophisticated understanding. She found herself asking detailed questions about crop rotation, natural pest management, and soil health that clearly impressed both her guides. "Cordelia designed this layout herself," she explained as they walked between raised beds. "She said it was based on principles from a book you recommended years ago." "Gaia's Garden," Wendy murmured, recognizing the permaculture design. "I sent that to her for her birthday in 2018. I didn't know she actually read it." "She read everything you sent," Marcus said quietly. "She kept them all in her study." They encountered other staff members throughout the tour. Jake, the marine biologist who monitored water quality, Carmen, who managed guest services with an infectious enthusiasm for sustainability education, Tom, the maintenance coordinator who could fix anything while maintaining zero waste principles. Each person spoke of Cordelia with a mixture of professional respect and genuine affection that made Wendy's chest tight with grief. She wasn't just our boss, Carmen explained as they watched guests participating in a beach cleanup. She was a mentor. She'd spend hours talking through ideas, challenging us to think bigger while staying grounded in practical reality. Like what? Jake asked. The waste-to-energy system was actually Tom's idea originally, but Cordelia helped him develop it into something that could be replicated at other facilities. Shelley said innovation only mattered if it could be shared. As the afternoon light began to slant golden across the water, Lily led Wendy to a small building partially hidden among the trees. This was Cordelia's study. Marcus has been maintaining it exactly as she left it. The study took Wendy's breath away. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls filled with environmental science texts, policy reports, and bound research papers. A large desk faced windows overlooking the harbor, its surface covered with neat stacks of correspondence and project plans. But what made Wendy's throat close with emotion were the personal touches, photos of the island's development over the years, handwritten thank you notes from guests, and a bulletin board covered with newspaper clippings about environmental breakthroughs. In the center of the board was a faded photo of 2 young girls examining something in a tide pool. Wendy recognized herself and Cordelia, maybe 8 and 10 years old, completely absorbed in their discovery. She never forgot where her passions started, Lily said softly. Marcus moved to a file cabinet and withdrew a thick folder. She kept detailed records of everything: environmental impact studies, financial projections, staff development plans. She also, he hesitated, then pulled out a smaller file. She kept newspaper clippings about your library's environmental programs, awards you won for community education, letters to the editor you wrote about conservation issues. Wendy stared at the evidence of her sister's attention, feeling decades of hurt and misunderstanding begin to shift. I thought she'd forgotten about me. She was protecting you, Lily said gently. She knew the family would pressure you to convince her to sell or develop more aggressively. She wanted you to make your own choice when the time came. Marcus set the financial folder on the desk. These are the resort's operating records for the past 5 years. Cordelia insisted that environmental responsibility and financial sustainability had to work together. She proved
everything she'd learned the day before. Now, with coffee steaming beside her and the first light of dawn filtering through the windows, she immersed herself in her sister's written thoughts. The earliest journal entries, dating back to 1995, revealed a Cordelia still reeling from their father's death and the unexpected inheritance that had changed her life. The money feels like a burden, one entry read. Everyone expects me to be grateful, but I keep thinking about the environmental damage Father's manufacturing business caused. How do I honor his memory while acknowledging the harm? How do I use this wealth responsibly? Wendy traced the evolution of her sister's thinking through pages of research notes, correspondence with environmental scientists, and detailed plans for sustainable development. A letter from Dr. James Hansen, the renowned climate scientist, thanked Cordelia for her generous funding of research into renewable energy storage. Another, from Dr. Sylvia Earle, praised her support of marine conservation efforts. She was networking with environmental leaders before most people had heard of climate change, Marcus said, appearing in the doorway with fresh coffee. May I? Wendy nodded, grateful for the company as she processed the magnitude of what she was discovering. Marcus settled into the chair across from the desk. That correspondence file represents 20 years of relationship building. Cordelia didn't just throw money at environmental causes. She educated herself, connected with the brightest minds in the field, and then found ways to implement their ideas here. Wendy opened a thick folder labeled Island Development Phase 1 and found herself looking at architectural plans that showed remarkable foresight. Every building placement considered wildlife migration patterns. The dock design minimized disruption to marine ecosystems. Even the hiking trails followed principles of sustainable tourism that wouldn't become mainstream for another decade. "Look at this," she murmured, pointing to a margin note in Cordelia's handwriting. She references a paper about biomimicry and sustainable architecture. That was cutting-edge thinking in 2001. "She was always ahead of the curve," Marcus agreed. "The solar installation we showed you yesterday, we upgraded it last year to incorporate new battery technology, but Cordelia had already designed the system to accommodate future improvements. She called it planning for innovations we haven't imagined yet." In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, Wendy found a folder that made her breath catch. It was labeled simply Wendy and contained newspaper clippings, printed emails, and what appeared to be surveillance reports dating back 15 years. "Library Director wins State Award for Environmental Education Program," read one headline. Another, "Local librarian organizes successful campaign against waterfront development." There were photos of Wendy speaking at town meetings, leading nature walks for children, and accepting recognition for her conservation advocacy work. "She was keeping track of me?" Wendy whispered. Marcus leaned forward to see what she'd found. "She was proud of you. She used to read these articles to the staff during our weekly meetings, usually followed by some comment about, 'My sister understanding what really matters.'" At the bottom of the folder was a thick bundle of letters, each addressed to Wendy, but never sent. The earliest was dated 3 years after their estrangement, the most recent just 2 months before Cordelia's death. With trembling hands, Wendy opened the first one. "Dearest Wendy, I saw in the paper that you organized the library's first Earth Day celebration. The photo shows 40 children gathered around you as you explain something about local wildlife. You look exactly like you did when we were young and you'd found a particularly interesting sea anemone to share with me. I wanted to call and congratulate you, but I know the family has made their position clear about my environmental obsessions. I don't want to put you in the middle of their disapproval, but I need you to know that seeing you follow your passion for conservation makes me believe we're still connected, even if we can't speak directly. I think about our childhood conversations constantly. Do you remember when we decided we'd become marine biologists and save the ocean together? You may not have followed that exact path, but you're doing the work in your own way. That matters more than any formal degree. All my love, Cordelia." Wendy's hands shook as she opened letter after letter, each one revealing her sister's continued love and respect despite their enforced separation. The most recent letter was the most devastating. "My darling sister, the doctors say I have maybe 6 months, so it's time to stop waiting for the right moment to reach out. I'm changing my will to leave you Sanctuary Island, and I know the family will be furious. They'll say you're not qualified, not experienced enough, too old to handle such responsibility. They'll be wrong. I've watched you advocate for environmental causes your entire adult life, even when it wasn't popular or profitable. You've educated hundreds of children about conservation. You've fought development projects that would have damaged local ecosystems. You've done this work without recognition, without financial reward, simply because you believe it matters. The island needs someone who understands that its value isn't measured in dollars, but in the life it sustains and protects. It needs someone who won't be tempted to sacrifice its mission for short-term profit. It needs you. I know this inheritance will complicate your life. I know the family will pressure you to sell or to let them manage things for your own good, but I also know you have the strength to resist them if you choose. You always were braver than you believed. Please forgive me for waiting so long to say this. I have been proud to call you a sister every single day of our estrangement. Nothing the family said about your simple life diminished that pride. You chose meaning over money, purpose over prestige. In a family obsessed with status, you remained true to your values. The island is my attempt to honor both your commitment to conservation and your right to finally be recognized for the remarkable woman you've always been.
I love you. I believe in you. And I hope you'll find the courage to claim what I'm offering. Not just the property, but the chance to create something that will outlast us both. Forever your loving sister, Cordelia. Wendy was openly weeping by the time she finished reading her sister's final words. Marcus had quietly left the room at some point, giving her privacy to process her sister's final words. When Lily appeared with a box of tissues and a gentle hand on her shoulder, Wendy didn't try to hide her tears. She never stopped loving me. Never, Wendy said through her sobs. Never, Lily confirmed, settling into the chair Marcus had vacated. She talked about you constantly. Your environmental work, your integrity, your intelligence. She said the family had convinced you weren't capable of big things, but she could see your potential even from a distance. I thought she'd forgotten about me. I thought she'd decided I wasn't worth her time. The opposite. She was protecting you from family pressure while documenting every proof that you were exactly the person she needed to continue this work. Look at these letters from environmental leaders. Half of them mention their eagerness to work with Cordelia's sister, the one she speaks so highly. Wendy opened a recent letter from Dr. Catherine Richardson, a marine biologist at the University of Copenhagen. The letter thanked Cordelia for her continued support of climate research and mentioned looking forward to meeting your sister Wendy, whose conservation work in small communities sounds fascinating. She was building bridges for me, Wendy realized, creating opportunities for me to step into this world, because she knew you belonged in it, Marcus said, returning with a fresh pot of coffee. The question is whether you're ready to believe that about yourself. Before Wendy could answer, her phone rang. Eleanor's name appeared on the screen, and something in the allayer's tone when she answered suggested this wasn't a routine check-in. Wendy, I need you to sit down. Richard filed papers yesterday afternoon to contest the will. He's claiming you're being manipulated due to age-related cognitive decline and requesting an emergency competency hearing. The words hit like a physical blow. What does that mean? It means we have a fight on our hands, and it means you need to decide right now whether you're committed to defending your inheritance. Because if we're going to win this, you'll need to prove not just that you're competent, but that you're capable of handling everything Cordelia left you. Wendy looked around the study, at the evidence of her sister's life's work, at the letters declaring a love that had never wavered, at Marcus and Lily's faces showing a mixture of concern and determination. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen and valued. Cordelia had believed in her. The island's staff respected her insights. The environmental community was ready to welcome her. The family wanted to take it all away. Eleanor, Wendy said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest, schedule the hearing. I'm not backing down. The courthouse in Portland felt like a cathedral designed to intimidate rather than inspire. Wendy sat beside Eleanor at the defendant's table, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Across the aisle, Richard's legal team occupied their positions with the confidence of expensive suits and billable hours. The lead attorney, Harrison Webb, projected the kind of authority that came from never having been told no by.
But not before Cordelia spent 6 months and probably thousands of dollars defending her sanity. Sound familiar? Wendy felt sick. Why didn't she tell me? Because you were dealing with Tom's cancer diagnosis, Eleanor said quietly. She probably didn't want to burden you with family drama when you had enough to handle. Grace pulled up another document. But here's the really interesting part. 3 months after the guardianship petition was filed, Frank Brown received a consulting contract worth $50,000 from Meridian Development Corporation. What's Meridian Development? Wendy asked. Eleanor's expression darkened as she studied the screen. A subsidiary of Coastal Properties Group. They've been trying to acquire Maine islands for resort development since the 1990s. So Uncle Frank was being paid by developers who wanted Cordelia's island, Grace said. And when the guardianship petition failed, suddenly Cordelia cut contact with the entire family. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity.
Wendy remembered that period. Cordelia's sudden coldness, her refusal to attend family gatherings, the way she'd stopped returning phone calls. The family had blamed it on her environmental obsession and hermit tendencies. There's more, Grace said, pulling up bank records. Remember how Dad's cancer treatment got so expensive, but somehow the bills kept getting paid? I found records of anonymous donations to the hospital's charity fund, always in amounts that exactly matched your outstanding balances. Wendy stared at the evidence of her sister's secret generosity. Cordelia was helping us? For 5 years, right up until Dad died. Grace's voice cracked slightly. She was taking care of you, while the rest of the family was calling her crazy. Eleanor had been making notes during Grace's presentation. This changes everything. We can prove a pattern of family members using legal manipulation to control women's assets. We can show financial motivation for their current actions, and we can demonstrate that Cordelia's estrangement was a protective response to actual threats, not mental instability. But there's something else, Grace said, her expression growing troubled. I found records of other anonymous payments, smaller ones but regular. Your car repairs, the library fundraiser shortfall, even your mortgage payment during that month you were sick and couldn't work. The magnitude of Cordelia's care overwhelmed Wendy. While she'd spent 20 years feeling abandoned by her sister, Cordelia had been quietly ensuring her financial security and supporting causes she cared about. She was protecting me all along, Wendy whispered. From them. Grace gestured toward the courtroom where Richard and Frank waited. She knew they'd pressure you to influence her if they realized how much she cared about you. The conference room door opened, and Marcus entered with Lily and 2 other people Wendy didn't recognize. Eleanor, Grace called and said you needed character witnesses. Perfect timing, Eleanor said. Grace has just provided us with evidence that could completely change this case. Marcus moved to see the laptop screen, his expression growing darker as he absorbed the information. Son of a bitch. Cordelia mentioned the 1998 incident once, but she never told us the details. Who tried to force the guardianship? Asked the woman with Marcus, whom Wendy recognized as Dr. Catherine Richardson from Cordelia's correspondence. Her nephews, the same ones claiming Mrs. Smith is incompetent now, Eleanor explained. Dr. Richardson's laugh was bitter. Cordelia was the most mentally sharp person I've ever worked with. She could discuss marine chemistry, sustainable engineering, and environmental policy with equal expertise. The idea that she was incompetent is absurd. The pattern is clear, said the second stranger, a man in his 50s who introduced himself as David Chen, an environmental lawyer. They target women in the family who pose a threat to their financial interests, then use the legal system to claim these women are incompetent to manage their own affairs. Lily spoke up from her position near the window. Cordelia told me she was terrified they'd do the same thing to Wendy if she left her the island directly. That's why she structured the inheritance so carefully, to give Wendy legal standing and evidence of competence before the family could react. She was setting up defenses, Eleanor realized. The will reading, the specific language about the key and the box, even the boat tickets to Maine. She wanted Wendy to see the island and understand its value before the family could interfere. Grace pulled up one final document. Uncle Frank admitted something else in a 1999 deposition. When asked why he thought Cordelia was incompetent, he said, and I quote, "Women of her age shouldn't be making decisions about complex financial matters without male family guidance." The silence that followed was deafening. He actually said that? Under oath, it's all here. Grace's anger was palpable. They've been using sexism and ageism as weapons against the women in our family for decades. Eleanor gathered the documents Grace had compiled. This is exactly what we need. We can prove that this competency challenge is part of a documented pattern of harassment. We can show financial motivation, and we can demonstrate that Cordelia's estrangement was a protective response to actual threats, not mental instability. As they prepared to return to the courtroom, Wendy felt a profound shift in her understanding of family history. The story she'd been told of Cordelia's increasing eccentricity and voluntary isolation crumbled in the face of evidence showing systematic attacks on her autonomy and intelligence. "She was braver than I realized," Wendy said quietly.
standing up to them alone, protecting me from a distance, building something meaningful despite their attempts to control her. And now it's your turn to be brave, Grace said, squeezing her grandmother's hand. She left you the tools to fight back. The question is whether you're ready to use them. Wendy looked around the room at the faces surrounding her. Eleanor's professional determination, Marcus's protective loyalty, Lily's nurturing strength, Dr. Richardson's scientific authority, and Grace's fierce devotion. For the first time in her life, she was surrounded by people who valued her intelligence rather than dismissing her for her age. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it completely. When they returned to the courtroom, Richard and Frank were huddled with their attorneys, confident in their position. They had no idea that their past had finally caught up with them or that the simple woman they were trying to control had just discovered the truth about decades of manipulation. The real battle was about to begin. When court reconvened, Eleanor stood with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, we'd like to present new evidence that bears directly on this case." Judge Hawkins reviewed Grace's documents with increasing interest. The 1998 guardianship petition, the developer payments, the pattern of targeting women in the family, each piece built an undeniable picture of systematic manipulation. "Mr. Webb," the judge said finally, "I'm troubled by these revelations about your client's previous legal actions." Webb stammered about irrelevant historical matters, but his bluster couldn't disguise the shift in courtroom dynamics. "Mrs. Smith," Judge Hawkins addressed Wendy directly, "would you like to speak for yourself?" Wendy stood, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Your Honor, my family claims I'm incapable of managing complex responsibilities, yet I've spent 40 years managing budgets, supervising staff, implementing technology systems, and educating thousands of community members about environmental conservation. The only thing I lack experience in is being valued for my intelligence rather than dismissed for my age." She gestured toward Richard's table. "My son says I'm being manipulated by people who want my money, but the only people trying to control my decisions are sitting right there. They've spent decades telling me I'm not smart enough, not capable enough, not worthy enough to make my own choices. My sister believed otherwise." The courtroom was silent as Wendy continued. "Cordelia left me that island because she knew I would protect its mission, not exploit it for profit. She trusted me to continue work that matters more than money. If that makes me incompetent in my family's eyes, then I'm proud to be incompetent." Judge Hawkins deliberated for only 10 minutes. "The evidence shows a clear pattern of harassment targeting women who make independent financial decisions. Mrs. Smith has demonstrated both mental capacity and relevant experience. This petition is not only denied, but dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Webb, your client's actions border on elder abuse." As the gavel fell, Wendy felt decades of doubt and diminishment finally lifted from her shoulders. She was free. 6 months after the courthouse victory, Wendy stood in Cordelia's former study, now her own, reviewing architectural plans for the island's newest addition, the Cordelia Brown Environmental Education Center. The morning sun streamed through windows she'd kept exactly as her sister had arranged them, but the space now buzzed with the energy of ongoing projects rather than preserved memories. Marcus knocked on the open door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone bearing good news. "The University of Maine partnership is official. Dr. Martinez wants to bring his marine biology program here for the entire summer session." 40 students? Wendy looked up from the plans, her reading glasses perched on her nose in a way that reminded Marcus remarkably like Cordelia. 42 plus graduate assistants. They'll help with the Osprey monitoring program and the new coral restoration project. Marcus settled into the chair across from her desk, the same spot where he'd first challenged her presence 8 months ago. Lily is already planning the curriculum integration. The transformation of their working relationship had been gradual but profound. Marcus's initial skepticism had evolved into respect, then partnership, and recently into something that made Wendy's cheeks warm when he looked at her with that particular smile. "Any word from Richard?" she asked, returning to safer topics. "He called yesterday. The Sustainable Development course at Portland Community College starts next month. He sounded different. Humbler, maybe." Wendy nodded thoughtfully.
The resort's profits and her careful reinvestment strategy would bring 20 young environmental advocates to the island each summer for intensive study and practical experience. "This one's from a girl in the Philippines who's developing mangrove restoration techniques," Grace continued. "And this boy from Ghana has a plan for solar-powered water purification systems." "The next generation of Cordelias," Marcus observed. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her medical bag slung over her shoulder. The island's small clinic had expanded under her direction, serving both guests and the growing community of researchers and students who called Sanctuary Island home during peak season. "Mom, the delegation from Costa Rica is here. They want to see how we integrate healthcare with environmental education." Sarah's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd found her true calling after years of feeling professionally unfulfilled. Through the window, Wendy could see the Costa Rican environmental ministers disembarking from the ferry, part of a growing stream of international visitors who came to study the island's sustainable tourism model. 3 countries had already implemented similar programs based on Sanctuary Island's blueprints. "Eleanor's here too," Sarah added. "She says the documentary crew wants to interview you this afternoon." Wendy sighed. The attention was gratifying, but sometimes overwhelming. Environmental magazines featured her story. Climate conferences invited her to speak. Graduate students wrote dissertations about the island's business model. At 70, she'd become something she'd never imagined, a recognized expert whose opinion mattered to people who'd never met her. "Tell the filmmakers I'll do the interview, but only if they focus on Cordelia's vision, not my personal story," she said. "This was always about the work, not the woman doing it." Marcus stood and moved to the window, watching the visiting delegation examine the solar installation with obvious admiration. "You know, Cordelia would be amazed by what you've built here. The island was her dream, but what you've created is something bigger." "I just continued what she started." "No," Grace said firmly, closing her laptop. "You transformed it. Cordelia built a sustainable resort. You created a movement." As if summoned by their conversation, Lily's voice carried across the grounds, leading a group of visiting students through the organic garden. Her words drifted through the open window. "Mrs. Smith's insight about cascading educational systems revolutionized how we think about environmental tourism." Wendy felt the familiar mix of pride and bewilderment that came with being recognized for intelligence she'd always possessed but rarely been allowed to demonstrate. The scared woman who'd sat in Eleanor's office, listening to family laughter, had evolved into someone who fielded calls from environmental ministers and advised graduate researchers. "The UN Environment Program wants to feature us in their next sustainability report," Marcus said quietly. "They're calling Sanctuary Island a transformative model for regenerative tourism." Cordelia's legacy. "Your legacy, too," Grace corrected. "You didn't just inherit what she built. You proved that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be." Through the window, Wendy watched the Costa Rican environmental delegation taking notes as Lily explained the waste management systems. Students from around the world worked alongside local researchers. Her son was preparing to learn skills that might redeem his relationship with meaningful work. At 70, Winifred Brown Smith had finally found her place in the world and discovered it was exactly where her sister had always believed she belonged. 1 year later, Wendy addressed the United Nations Environmental Summit via video link from her study, now buzzing with the island's first international climate symposium. Environmental stewardship isn't about grand gestures, she told world leaders, her voice carrying hard-earned authority. It's about proving sustainable practices can be profitable and replicable. At 69, I supposedly lacked the capacity for complex responsibilities. Yet, Sanctuary Island now generates revenue while healing marine ecosystems, educates the next generation, and provides a model 3 countries have implemented. Through her window, researchers from 6 continents collaborated with local fishermen. Grace led workshops for environmental ministers, her MIT acceptance letter framed nearby. Sarah ran the innovative eco-medical clinic that attracted international physicians. Even Richard approached hesitantly, seeking the consulting position she'd offered after his bankruptcy taught him humility. Marcus appeared with wine from their experimental vineyard. "To Cordelia," he said, raising his glass. "To second chances," Wendy corrected, thinking of opportunities that came after everyone assumed her life was over. "To proving them wrong," Grace added with fierce satisfaction. At 70, Wendy had become exactly what Cordelia always knew she could be, respected for accumulated wisdom rather than dismissed for age. The family had laughed at her inheritance of $5 and a brass key. The last laugh was definitively hers.